The Fed has been talking a lot lately. Many people, including myself, expect the Fed to fail a long time ago. There's a very good reason for this. Higher interest rates will crush the economy and the US Treasury. In reality, the Fed is holding a losing hand and attempting to win a card game by bluffing. So far, the Fed has defied critics by sticking to its guns and pushing forward. Despite the Fed's hawkish stance, we can still be certain that they are 100% bluffing. Everyone knows that higher interest rates will be disastrous at some point. It is difficult to put a specific timeline on it, but it's not impossible. So what causes this inflation? Inflation was caused by central banks, including the US Federal Reserve, printing trillions of dollars out of thin air and injecting them into global economies. And the debt that we should be concerned about was encouraged by those same central banks artificially holding down interest rates for more than a decade. The only way to reverse inflation is to soak the excess fiat currencies from the economy. In fact, while the current efforts by central banks to control inflation are almost certain to cause economic chaos, they are completely inadequate to slay the inflation dragon. Powell's perspective is typical of most central bankers. After the financial crisis of 2008, the Federal Reserve and other central banks around the world kept interest rates at zero, and they implemented quantitative easing in an effort to delay economic pain. A bad recession didn't need to get worse, right? And that was the goal of these central banks. And as governments shut down their economies due to the pandemic, they then doubled down. The actual goal of central banks was to sustain stock prices. They also wanted to boost the value of real estate, and they aimed to prop up economies. And in order to achieve all that, they printed a lot of money and brought forth, well, this inflation. Isn't that fascinating? Now that we have a major inflation problem, the Fed and other central banks must battle a monster they created. However, they cannot fight and create inflation at the same time. So if the only reason the economy was propped up was inflation, and we're now removing the inflation prop, everything built on top of that foundation must collapse. And this is exactly what we are witnessing. So you probably wonder what will happen next. Inflation will continue to rise even while the economy deteriorates. In reality, every time the Fed raises rates, it lags more behind the inflation curve because the rate increases aren't really doing anything. It's too late. To do anything behind the curve, the Fed needs to make interest rates positive. They must raise rates above the rate of inflation. We need substantial cuts in government spending, but the government is doing the opposite. We had the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act. All of this amount to increase spending, which is the last thing you want to do when you have an inflation problem. Is your money safe? Despite rising inflation, the Fed will try to stimulate the economy at some point. As a result, we will experience a massive recession or depression, as well as financial crisis and rising inflation. All of this bodes well for gold, as negative for the dollar though, so my advice to you is to tune out all the talk about how the Fed will succeed and bring down inflation back to 2%, and you'll be better off investing as if the Fed will fail, not succeed. But of course, this is not the year 1980. Powell is not the same as Paul Volcker, who is widely regarded as a hero of courageously breaking inflation by keeping the federal funds rate at as high as 14 to 19% while avoiding a hasty pivot to lower rates during the recession. So what should we do? We should do the polar opposite of what worked in the 80s. We must do what worked in the 70s, which was to exit US stocks and bonds and invest in commodities, foreign assets, and gold. The Fed has already convinced the market that they are in control and they will not pivot too soon. The Fed has bluffed as hard as they could. They have completely destabilized the currency market, even if they have no interest in foreign currencies or the economy. They cannot escape the laws of mathematics. Either they pivot or the Treasury falls into debt spiral, which the economy will follow suit. I also believe Powell hasn't found religion. In my opinion, when it comes down to it, I believe he'll commit the same old sin of inflation. Powell still believes he can accomplish the impossible. He still believes we can return to 2% inflation with a bumpy landing, a slight increase in unemployment, and a period of below-trend growth. But I think Powell will pivot once he realizes how bad things are going to get. But this is a giant game of chicken, and I believe Powell will keep up the pretense for as long as he can. The Fed will almost certainly follow suit at some point. However, it will be too late to save the economy. So brace yourselves, people, for some serious stagflation. So guys, thanks for watching my video. If you got any questions, leave a comment below, and I'll see you in the next video.